Hi folks, I thought I would do a bonus video seeing as I have all these pictures up on my wall behind me and sort of go through them and point out which ones I think worked the best and give you an opportunity to give me some feedback. Let me know which ones are your favourites and which kind of styles you like best, because I'm going to use this going forward in my artwork and to inform what styles to try out and to stick with and to experiment more within. So without further ado, let's go through the tour of the whole thing. And if you want to see any of these videos, these pieces in progress, I've got full process videos up on my channel. I've got a full playlist that I will link below and in the cards, so if you want to go back and watch any of these in more detail, you can do so. Alrighty, without further ado, let's get on with it. Here are the first two, and I think I learnt quite a lot from simply doing the first one and applied that knowledge to the second one. So with Artemis, I've sort of been saying that I like it, but it doesn't really feel like a piece of my work in the same way. And if I were to do it again now, I would treat it quite differently. I definitely would have more outline happening and more pattern, which is what I did in this second one, which is Circe. And having that pattern in the background really made it feel much more like a piece of my work. And I felt a lot more comfortable working in this kind of style. Then we move on to Persephone, which I really like the concept of. I think it might be one of the strongest concepts in terms of having all these branches and roots sort of entangling her, and I talk more about that in the video itself, the time lapse. I was not super confident with drawing skin and all that at this point, and I don't think that came out especially well. I could have done with some deeper tones in there and to make it more contrasting. But as I said, we learn as we go. And then Cassandra, this is probably my least favourite, and I think that's reflected in the number of likes on Instagram as well. So you guys seem to agree. This is Cassandra of Troy, and a few things not working here. Mostly her expression. I think the reference picture I used was a little too static looking and didn't really have that dynamic look that I needed for a piece like this. And then we move on to Gaia, which I have mixed feelings about. I like the pattern that's happening around the outside, but I was quite scared to do the darker skin tones just because it's harder to, if you put a colour down, you're kind of set with it to some extent. And so that was my first try at doing darker skin tones. I haven't blended it especially well here, but I do like the way it all kind of comes together. So aside from that, I think this one works quite well. Again, a bit of a concept happening there. Penelope is the first one where I really felt like I was coming into my stride, and this really felt like a piece of my work. And mostly because of all this coppery stuff happening in the background, and yeah, I just really like all that pattern, which I tried to replicate in this next one and didn't go so well. I think using both copper and gold didn't really work for me here, so I don't think I did that again, which is probably a good call. Medusa was the first one where I really felt like it came out the way I wanted it to. I had a vision for how I wanted this to be, quite like a religious icon, something like that, and it actually worked. So I was really proud of myself with this one for actually managing to get it to do what I wanted it to. And I think it was only sort of upwards from here. That the first week I was not really feeling it, to be honest, but from here onwards things changed and picked up. So then we get to Aphrodite, which didn't do so well on Instagram, but I think that's because it got blocked from hashtags, probably because it's got a naked lady in it. So Instagram didn't like that. but it got a lot of engagement. People seem to really respond to this one. I love the colours. They're completely out of my comfort zone, not the normal sort of colours I would use, but I think I just really like everything about this one. I don't think there's anything I would change. Maybe the pink slightly less bright, but apart from that, I mean, I think these clouds came out really well, and the water and the bubbles, and it just reminds me of a vintage soap box or soap advertisement, so really happy with that one. Likewise with Demeter, this one I sort of experimented a little bit. I'd finished it more or less and then added this halo around the outside, which I think worked really well, and it sort of changed the whole dynamic of it and the composition, and I'm just really pleased. That seemed like quite a happy accident. I love the flat colours alongside the sort of depth to her face and in the wheat that's growing around. So yeah, really pleased with that. Orpheus I was not quite so happy with. I think the red needed to be a lot deeper, and because think Orpheus and the underworld, it's a bit too bright and happy looking, especially as his face is so kind of forlorn and sad looking. I sort of thought he looked a bit Polynesian, but then my pen started running out, and so his chest looks a little bit like he's got a suntan on the top, and then his chest is kind of lighter. So yeah, being super critical here, but I am happy with how his face turns out, and especially the way his hair turned out. Actually, that black with grey for highlights actually worked really quite well, and I do like the composition with these the musical staves going around him. I think that worked a lot better in this one than it did with Apollo. Then we come on to Hera, and this is possibly my favourite. It's definitely one of my favourites. This is the first time I've decided to keep the face blank and just have flat colour instead of colouring it in with tone like I had on all the previous ones, or apart from Medusa. Actually, I had done that on Medusa, but I don't feel like that counts because it's green. Anyway, I liked the flatness, and I really like with this one that the colour scheme is so simple. It's just using black and copper inks, which worked really well, and I don't think there's anything I would change about that. I'm very pleased with that one. Psyche I had kind of mixed feelings about. I actually think it turned out quite well in the end, especially after I added in more of these dots. I had to have a lot of them in there for them to really show up and to read as light coming off of this candle. And I think the details in here in her hair really helped, and the freckles gave it all quite a sort of pattern-like surface. So you've got lots of the dots, the dots all over basically, and yeah, I really like that, and I love the warmth of this one as well. Then we've got Narcissus, which is just catching the light beautifully there. I'm not super happy with how his face turned out. What's something that I discovered as I went along is that the smaller the faces are, the harder time I have drawing them well, especially, you know, even using the dip pen, it didn't come out as well as I had hoped, but that's okay. I really like the way the reflection works though, and the typography actually. So the rest of it I'm pretty happy with on this one. Then we have Nyx, which was a bit of an experiment again, and I've had a lot of really positive feedback on this one, which is fantastic. I'm not quite sure how I feel about this one. It's definitely not one of my favourites, but I'm happy to know that so many people really love it. Then we've got Athena. And again, I wasn't thrilled with this one. I quite like the way the pattern all worked out. In the video of this one, I talk about how I hadn't really planned on doing all this pattern, and then it just kind of happened, which was probably quite a good idea. Her skin tone on this one, I feel like I could have worked on a bit more and blended it in a bit more. It's a bit patchy, and it also kind of lightened as the inks went into the paper. So it was supposed to be a little bit darker than that. But the contrast still reads quite well on this, especially with all that white happening in her dress and on the owl. Okay, then we have Cheeky Dionysus, which I really like, and this one didn't do so well on Instagram, which is odd, and also because this one took me so long. I spent probably the most time on this one. There's a lot of detail happening, for one thing, and I think the detail shots almost are better than the piece as a whole, but yeah, I really like all these details, and I enjoyed doing them as well. And I quite like his expression. The only thing I'm not so fond of is the way his lips are so red, which was a sort of last minute decision because I figured he'd be drinking wine, and it just made him look a little bit more feminine than I wanted him to. But yeah, that's okay. Orpheus and Eurydice. I do like this one. I was a little bit annoyed that these smudges happened, but it sort of adds to the energy of it, I suppose. Yeah, I'm pretty pleased with how that one turned out. I know a lot of people seem to like this one too. I didn't enjoy the process of this one so much though, and so I think that's kind of clouded my view of it a little bit. Unlike Ganymede, which was absolutely my favourite one to do, and is one of my absolute favourites as well. I like how the skin tone turned out. I think I managed to blend it really quite well. Unlike some of the earlier ones, I've actually got the hang of it here. And I really like the brown ink, which is a Winsor & Newton ink. And this was the first time I tried it out, and it came out really well. And then there's a bit of silver over the top. Oh, it's just catching the light. I just like this one because it's so pretty, and he looks kind of otherworldly, and I really like the way his mouth turned out too. I'm not very good at drawing mouths, and this one came out pretty well. So I love his expression, I love the sort of softness of it, and yeah, all up, I'm very fond of this one. Then we have Helen, which again I'm pretty pleased with. The only thing I would maybe change is the shape of her mouth a little bit. But apart from that, I really like all the gold. I'm definitely biased towards the ones with lots of gold or lots of copper happening. Then we have the Graces. Again, I struggled with the faces being so small on this one. And also I feel like her eyes could have been tamped down a little bit. Like the white is too white. The contrast is a little bit jarring. But I mean, apart from that, this one did quite well on Instagram as well. People seem to like it. I like the typography and all of this, and those little flecks of gold in there too. I've got to be honest, I did not like how this one turned out, and in retrospect, I actually would have done this one more like the Demeter one, which is that one there. So I would have done the blue flames up the side and had her larger. Because the main thing I don't like about this, I think, is that her face, again, was so small and it was really hard to draw that size. That's something I've always struggled with, drawing faces small, and it would have been probably easier in pencil or something, but using a dip pen and markers, it's really hard to do that. Despite all these, you know, tiny small lines and dots and all of that, just the face was a challenge for me here. And this one is absolutely one of my favourites. I think along with probably Hera and Ganymede. And I love all the detail. Again, lots going on in here, and her expression, she seems sort of defiant, and yeah, there's nothing I would change with this one, which is quite unusual because usually there is. Okay, then we have Arachne. And I'm pretty pleased with how this one came out too. You can probably tell that I was trying to replicate what I'd done with Ganymede, having the really soft feel, using silver instead of gold, and using this brown ink as well for the details on the face. And this galaxy effect, I just really like. So I'm pretty pleased with that one. Then we have Hestia, which I did two versions of. You can go back and see the video if you want to see both versions. And this is the one that I think worked out better as a design, although the other one perhaps worked better for the sort of the essence of the goddess. But overall, I think this one worked better. Again, the flat colours worked for me. Then we have Patroclus, and I was not super happy with this one either, although people on Instagram seem to really like it, so that's encouraging. I did redo this one as well, so if you want to go and see a different version of this, which is, it's got a different drawing altogether, it's Achilles and Patroclus, you can go back and watch that one. They're both on the same video. Then we have Daphne, which I really like as well. I was glad that I went back in and added a lot more detail and foliage in there. I think that really helps and brings the whole thing up. I think this would have been better with using a liquid black ink for the background rather than the Copic marker. I would have given it a little bit more depth, but I was running out of black ink at this point, so I had to make do with the markers. Likewise on Iphis and Ianthe, the black could have been darker, but that's okay. I like the pattern-like stuff going on here, and I really like how the violets turned out. That's probably my favourite part of this. We're nearly at the floor on my wall of Inktober. Here we have Nike, which I wasn't super excited about how this turned out, but I wasn't super excited about the drawing either. I'm not sure how I would have changed this to make it better though. I do like how sort of bold she looks, and I love the contrast between the wings and her hair and how it kind of frames her and the way it moves forward. So, you know, there are lots of good things happening here. But yeah, I do prefer this next one here, which is Sappho, and there's so much gold happening and I'm pretty pleased with how this one turned out. The colours, I played around with some different colour schemes ahead of time, and these were the ones I came up with and thought worked best. It's quite well balanced, and yeah, look at that gold. It's so shiny. Can we get the shine? Yeah, there we go. So good. And finally we have Hecate in all of her 1920s flapper glory. She looks pretty serious, maybe a little bit cross, and I like the way the copper really shows up nicely against that purple. I like the contrast. I like the, again, very limited colour palette, and that's what I'm coming to learn. The sort of simpler the colours are, the better, and that's something I've tried to do across the board with these. Yeah, so that's the whole thing, which seems like a massive amount of work to do in a month. And I know I did start these a bit early in order to get some of the planning in. I would recommend, if you're doing Inktober and have a space, or doing a 30-day challenge, if you have a space to put them all up, to really see your progress as you go, that makes a huge difference to sort of your morale and to see how far you've come. And I also found it helpful to sort of remember what order I'd done them in. Please let me know in the comments which one is your favourite. And these are all now available as prints on my website. I will have these available for the whole month of November. They're just going to be a limited time, not a limited print run, just a limited time, because I will have to do all the fulfillment myself, and that takes time, and it's not something I want to be doing all day, every day. But yeah, if you want to have one of these lovely things on your wall, let me know. They're going to be the same size pretty much, which is an A4 standard paper size, so it should be easy enough to find frames for them and all of that. I will leave the link to the shop down below. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for joining me on this Inktober journey. It's been a wild ride, and I feel like I need to sleep for about a week now, but you know, onwards and upwards. Next month is going, or this month is going to be Slowvember, so I will be vlogging for that and show you what I'm doing. And yeah, I'm going to be working on one piece for the whole month, probably still on a Greek mythology theme. So I will see you in the rest of November, and thank you very much for watching. Bye.